Okay, let's do this. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode. An idea I was inspired to speak about was actually a play on words. I often play with language. It's as if when my mind, how can I say it? My mind plays with language. And sometimes the sounds of words intersect the meaning of different words. So, for example, the word peace and the word peace, they both sound the same, yet they have totally opposite meanings. In one manner, the sense of collective unity we all seek is in pieces. So, pretty much my mind was entertaining the idea, the linguistic kind of elegance of the pieces of peace and, a piece in pieces. So, I want to kind of suggest that there's a sort of collective and individual dynamic of existence. I remember there was a moment, and now hopefully my voice is loud enough. There was a moment where I lost a series of these talks, like 300 of them. 300, 400 of these recordings I had done, these Mr.Within talks. And I remember when that happened, there was a sort of internal story going on behind my eyes, where it was as if uh, an aspect of my personality felt destroyed. I felt as if time had stolen something from me. Not per se stolen, but I felt it was as if sometimes most people on this planet, a lot of their problems will kind of go away with the proper acknowledgement. So you see, sometimes more than trying to define what humanity is the actions of humanity, the kind of behavioral acceptance of each other's presence that kind of liberates the species. So I remember I had lost these talks, and I remember I kind of fell to the ground. It was the first time, like for a long time. I started these talks in 2014, and when I started them, I was on a sort of rampage. It would be nonstop, as if my thoughts were moving really fast in my mind, and they still do, but now they move with a certain depth. But the notion was that I collapsed. I remember I was in the UK, I was in this accommodation area kind of suite I had, and I fell to the ground, and I felt like 400, like maybe 300, 200 hours of my life had just disappeared. And I remember, because since childhood, I've always had a sensitivity to presence. I later on realized this. Presence, by presence, I mean sometimes there are forms that are real objectively, and sometimes there are forms that are real subjectively. Sometimes your subconscious animates itself as a invisible other. Sometimes the logos communicates. There's many ways we can see kind of this movement, but it's a sort of movement. You can say movement of intelligence. Anyways, I was kind of looking at the depth of, how can I say it? There's a very nice word we use in Persian. It's called kahinat. Another way of saying it is that pretty much the mysteries and that are beyond the clouds of your imagination and rationality, you can consider that the divine, you know? So pretty much the spirit of divinity, the ancient Greeks called it the logos. They kind of saw that knowledge was not the effort of man, it was the effort of the world. How we walk, how we are, it's not just the effort of us, it is the effort of the world we're in as well, where the designs are found to be one, accessible and present. So anyways, I kind of collapse and I'm like shouting at the sky behind my eyes, and I'm saying kind of why. I was asking the sort of intuitive guidance I felt walking with me, why such a thing occurred. And I remember it was because there was a sort of attachment. I mean, there wasn't per se a reason. It was probably my carelessness and why the talks got lost. But I remember because many of these talks that have been uploaded, they have survived on thin ice. That means I remember I decided to go into a production mode of these talks. So I was more in the creative vibe rather than the storage and maintenance of these talks. And I've had moments where I've given talks and the talk wasn't recorded. So for 2 hours I was like speaking and it wasn't recorded, and I kind of realized some talks, like my ears, are meant to hear, and just the world, the silence of the world. It's not often that, like, how would I say, it's not always that we're speaking for the intelligence. Sometimes, think of it this way, your life is a memory for this existence, and what kind of memory do you choose to leave behind? So I remember as I fell, like I kind of like fell back, and there was this sort of shock of nervousness. I felt I had lost something of great value. And I looked at I'm gonna keep saying, like, the sky behind my eyes. There's a sky in front of my eyes, but there's a sky behind my eyes, and that sky is animated in ways that objective reality will never be able to relate to. It's kind of like a robot trying to understand what it's like being human. Sometimes the deeper dimensions of your mind, they're there, but the way one's conscious framework is choosing to access it, the frame doesn't work. It usually doesn't, because it transcends the language threshold and transcends the domain of definable experience. So you pretty much have to silently, some parts of the forest you silently walk, or I could say it more poetically, in this garden of existence, there are moments where you're walking with others, and there are moments you're walking alone. Okay, pretty much the eagle needs to know how to fly in the sky really high. At the same time, it also needs to know how to be on the branch and observe the processes of life. You see, because spirituality and metaphysics and all this stuff, and even one can say the reason the seed of imagination was planted in the mind of a creature from the soil. It's kind of one of those things where man looks for God, but when he sees it, he is no longer a man. Do you see? If you were to truly confront the actual philosophical depth of how existence is here, you cannot avoid emptiness. You cannot avoid nothingness. You cannot avoid death. You cannot avoid change, pretty much, because you can say, just like how it's a change of angle, it's a change of perception. Trust me, it's like there's only one place that the planet can orbit the other way in, and it is behind your eyes. In front of your eyes, you're here kind of to learn from the laws of manifestation. Behind your eyes, you're there to kind of learn from a sort of your own inner intelligence law. So there's a sort of uniqueness, It's kind of like you discover the presence of nature underneath all your ideological approaches to contain this world. Okay, so right now I'm speaking to you. I'm choosing to contain this intelligence that I am through various names. For example, I've chosen the alias Mr.Within online. Okay, that was the closest thing I could find to a kind of name, no name kind of thing. The name is not an object. You see, what is within you is not objective. I'm not talking about your cells, I'm not talking about your organs, I'm talking about how consciousness is apparent to itself. Right now, if you were not intelligent, you would not know you're here. But because because you know you're here, that is the ability of consciousness. That is the gift of evolution. The fact that you know there is something here that can be valued, that can be designed, that can be shaped, these keep the free will alive. Trust me, it's very unique. In ancient times, there was this kind of saying where there was like these two partners, these two couples, okay? And back in the time, back in certain cultures, they would acknowledge the idea of the soul was as real as the idea of like your heart beating. Okay, back in there's been certain cultures where they acknowledge the idea of soul. Right now, we're in a sort of kind of secular moving. It's like a secular directed kind of society. That means we have found that we are opening up to the idea of higher dimensions. But back in the day, they would see life and they would acknowledge it extremely multidimensional, and they would color it in many ways. For example, the sun, they would look at it, it was a god. It was the light that was the light of existence. For example, the ancient Egyptians, like, I could totally see why they were worshiping the sun, because it is light that is being our visual reality. And that's the fascinating part, that we see all these objects, we see all this phenomena, but it is light's dance. So anyways, I remember falling on the floor, kind of on my back, looking at the ceiling, and constantly be having this kind of shock and anger and grief. And I was kind of either trying to direct it at myself, or I was directing it at my inner self. Okay. So when you blame your imagination for your troubles, you're kind of blaming the gods that you see behind the clouds. But when you blame yourself, that means you're blaming how you use real data, because your mind is kind of divided between real and unreal data, you know? So what that means is that it's not just computers that have data processing capabilities. We have a very unique way of organizing phenomena. Okay, now you can say imagination is subtler levels of natural phenomena. Like, we can say that superstition is foolish because we have a cultural social justification of why superstition is not useful. Okay, because it is not real. Why bring the unreal and the real kind of debate? But the problem is we are in a kind of unreal kind of setting. We're on a rock in the middle of nowhere. Okay, it's not that people are weird on this planet. It's not that there's weird people on the planet. It's just that the situation is so magnificently mysterious that sometimes I wonder if humanity took the wrong turn. And when I look at civilization, I wonder what it's making, because it's kind of like looking at someone making food and they're using various ingredients, but you can't tell what they're making. And eventually you begin to see the type of container they're using, the kind of instruments they're using, the way they're using them. And so eventually, as you study life, the world you see, at least, its secrets open up to you. You no longer fear this world. And that is an incredible achievement, when you no longer feel life just being life. That's when your mind actually finds a sort of calmness, a sort of presence of serenity, where regardless of how life moves, there is a sort of grace of the overall system's movement, kind of in your subconscious. In yoga, they had various traditions. And it's very funny, guys, because I keep trying to explain to you my kind of inner experience after after the loss of the talks. And I have to kind of explain the context of it first, so you kind of see how I was. Okay, pretty much, let me say it like this. I shouted at my moment of why I was experiencing such a moment, okay? Then an inner vision took place. An inner vision is when your mind chooses to show you only something, not the whole world. Your imagination is like, believe it or not, your private room. It is something that, regardless of what occurs to the physical body, the subjective realm's kind of availability does not change. Even though through old age and whatnot, whatever happens. But the thing is that because we started off as creatures of the body, but we have become creatures of the mind. Because when the moment this ape drew art on like a cave wall, like the caveman drew art on the cave wall, that was like, what can I tell you? That was a reason given for infinity to continue. It's incredibly majestic, the world we're living in, because it is colored by how we look at it. And how we look at it comes down to a raw presence of attention. Okay? This raw presence of attention, it is so simple that to think of it complexly leads you astray when it comes to this enlightenment thing. Okay? Because to be honest, I am kind of speaking to the world, but I am kind of focusing on ideas of spirituality and pretty much where man's mind meets the unknown. Okay, where it could be in anything, any branch of knowledge. Like I could tell you the value of such a moment when you see something that no one else has. You will know its value. Trust me, we were hunter-gatherers, okay? In our evolutionary phases, we have that kind of attitude built in us because we had to survive. We had to, in some sense, be like the world around us. Kind of, we had to not just, all these kids I see who are trying to fit in to school and whatnot. Even myself, when I was younger, like there was that kind of mentality. I realized that is a sort of tribal, ancient kind of dynamic in the psychology of the human mind. That we, at some point, were like, okay, if we are in a world of animals, then animals we have become. You see, it is very easy. Our evolution, the decisions of the civilization are either going to take it back into the cave, or they're going to take it, in some sense, beyond the stars. There's two ways of moving in this world. There's an inner way and there's an outer way. There's a way where the world moves, you know, and there's a way where you move the world. And these have to do with the subtlety of studying imagination. Now, the first thing I realized about imagination is that it's very hard to study it because it varies for every person. We can say real imagination is the other side of the whale of reality. So it's in the Rig Vedas, this ancient Vedic text, it says that the mind is a slave to the real. And because the soul is, in some sense, how the mind is, you know, it's as if we say there's a soul in a body that is projecting a mind that's considering it's a soul again. There's that mentality. It's one of those things where, how can I tell you? Your soul is like space. Your mind is like, how can I tell you? It's like, let me see how I could choose to say this metaphor. Okay, let's say it like this. There's some traditions where they acknowledge just body and a mind. There's some traditions that acknowledge only body and the soul. And there's some traditions that acknowledge there's a body and there's a mind and then there's a soul. So many human beings in many mystical cultures have had various ways they've classified the levels of their intelligence. Some people don't want to see levels at all. Some people just want to look at objectivity, you know, and in some sense, that's one route. There's some people who don't want to look objectivity. For me, when I see extreme religious people, do you know what I see? I see someone who's trying to get away from the world. That's why they have to save it. They have to religiously save it, because for me, imagination has a value and reality has a value. And the mind starts off in reality. The fact that you have structures built upon structures in regards to how various moments you've walked to and your mind has recorded various designs, you kind of begin to see your mind is like this design generating phenomena. Now check this out. I was under this impression it's a design generating phenomena, but as some people say, like in regards to extrasensory experience or some sort of unique thing that I felt in my moment, which was some sort of immaterial intelligence, how that came across to me was very unique. Because I realized the less I searched for truth, the less the truth was something specific. Do you see? So you can say, the more macrocosmically the microcosmic being becomes conscious, the more it begins to see that it is the microcosm because the macrocosm is here. It's as if you're a material being because consciousness and the space for that material movement to have meaning is here. Okay? So this begs the question, especially for René Descartes. It did. René Descartes is a French philosopher. And he's also an incredible mathematician. For example, the XY axis they teach in mathematics. The Cartesian plane, it comes from René Descartes. This dude was not just a philosopher; he was also exploring the realms of numerology and trying to expand it. But anyways, I'll get to this. René Descartes was a sort of, kind of, you can say, I don't want to say badass, but a very interesting philosopher. Okay? For me, when I see philosophers, I don't just see philosophers. I see how very unique minds functioned in this planet. Okay? And everybody is unique. Everybody in their life will eventually witness something that they will consider great. Okay? It doesn't matter if you find it in the gutters of your desires or if you find it in the heavens of your order. It doesn't matter how it looks. You know, it's one of those things where that is the kind of primal ability. You know why religions were keeping love alive? Well, you know why they said love God? You know, let me tell you why. Because the act of love is an act of trust. And an act of trust is an act of access. You see? It's as if all the beings who ran to find the ultimate truth, do you know what they found out? They realized truth was ultimate from the beginning. There's a certain Buddhic text, I'll get back to Rene Descartes, but I'm going to tell you this. There's a certain Buddhic text which is called the Lotus Sutra. Okay, and there's a quote, for example, in this text where it says, keep your mind alive and free without abiding in anywhere or anything. So, like that level of depth. And in the Lotus Sutra was a kind of, they have this conclusion that the Buddha, at the end of his life, before he left this world, suddenly, for the first time, became bewildered and became shocked. And all his disciples ran to him, and they're like, Buddha, what's wrong? And in some sense, Buddha looked at them, and Buddha said, I have, in some sense, how can I tell you? What's the proper words? Buddha kind of looked at them and said, I was wrong. And all the disciples got shocked too, you know? And Buddha said, I was wrong because we were all enlightened from the beginning. Okay? You know what this means? This means truth is no longer what your attention finds important the moment you find it. You see, the moment you find something, it goes out of value. If you found truth, the self would go out of value. It would be a full integration. Now, we are a unique position in this reality. Do you know, I'm a man who is very, like, I find my I find there's a war of language going on. This is my interpretation. And in this war of language, I feel every human being that communicates, in some sense, realizes themselves to be an advanced communication of the universal sector. It's like for the first time, free will is sculpting what God has already sculpted before. We are interpreting data that has already been chosen for us. Okay. Anyways, I'm gonna kind of get back to Rene Descartes because before I go out of the stratosphere. Rene Descartes, he had this sort of unique realization that doubt was a way for him to access the ultimate. And what that meant is that his kind of approach to enlightenment and truth was like, okay, doubt. Let's see what we can doubt and let's find what we cannot doubt. So he started off doubting everything. Okay, he doubted his childhood, everything, every moment. Eventually, he came to the realization he cannot doubt something. Rene Descartes realized he cannot doubt the isolated thinking subject. He cannot doubt that kind of identity that is asking the question and even wanting to doubt. He cannot doubt the doubter. He'd recognized this as a moment of awareness, and he considered it as an isolated thinking subject. Now, years later, this German philosopher came by the name of Hegel. And now this is after Descartes. But Hegel he said something that if Descartes was alive, Descartes would thank Hegel for what he said. Okay, and this is what Hegel says in regards to Rene Descartes. Rene Descartes suddenly, the moment he realized he can't doubt this sort of self that's doubting, this isolated thinking subject, he suddenly saw a division between dimensions. He, in some sense, consciously saw how his mind, that isolated thinking subject, and the physical reality are separate. So in some sense, Rene Descartes' mind kind of came into this realization of the subjective realm and the objective realm and how they are separate. They're not there. It's as if like two dimensions in one room. Okay? Do you see? And so it's like a room colored with two different like colors of lights. Okay? So Rene Descartes suddenly noticed, and this is Rene Descartes' famous idea of dualism, the mind-body dualism, how the mind and body are dual. Now, in other episodes, I've gone into other stories of Rene Descartes, but for now, I'm going to kind of bring it back to how I'm going to kind of relate this to the title. Rene Descartes had this sort of dualism, and he realized he can't doubt the isolated thinking subject, but he can doubt language and he can doubt society and all this. And Hegel suddenly came and said like something as if like this was Hegel's response, kind of like sometimes like the future generations uh, will do things that the past generations, their minds will automatically be opened because they are not burdened by the weight of past mistakes. Hegel said that this notion that this isolated thinking subject is the only thing that's there, and no society and nothing, and this sort of mind is separate from everything that we have objectively given value to. Do you know? Hegel came and said your idea of an isolated thinker, like subject, this sense of isolated self. Hegel came and said the codependency of the self and the society. That means if Rene Descartes did not know language, okay, Hegel is one of the great language philosophers. Wittgenstein is another one of them. And there's many, many human beings have contributed in that domain. But Hegel brought this idea that it can't be the isolated thinking subject because the values Rene Descartes' mind was using were also found in, like they were codependent to society, kind of like how in some of my other talks I've said that your sense of self is actually like a reference point for your sense of world. So sometimes the world you think you're seeing is based on the sense of self you think you are. Who you think you are right now is dictating how you feel the world is, because your eyes are not everywhere. If you only use your biological objective sight, that's like just visual. That's like just what's visible in the room of matter. Okay, but if you want to access a different sort of sight, that sight will take you to a non-dual realm. So there's no longer any esotericism to it. There's no longer any map to it. There's no longer any secrets to it. It's no longer a freaking game for different human minds to come through different moments in history and kind of reshape it. It's very hilarious. It's as if like a lot of spiritual people with their unique beliefs feel they're not idol worshipping. They're worshipping something that's beyond and transcendental and mysterious. And I tell you that you won't believe it, how it's not just their fault. The human mind has an ability to constantly layer something with meaning. Okay? So that means just like how back in the day, like it was called pantheism, people who kind of worship nature and just objects and stuff. Okay, even in Japan, we had that sort of state of mind blooming, and it was found in Shinto. Shinto was this sort of Japanese religion where every objective phenomena was a vessel for this infinite highway of souls or something. I say it like that, but it follows those ideas. And so, anyways, this notion came that this isolated thinking subject is not really isolated because the only way it's choosing to be isolated is by choosing to be separate from the others. Okay? So you kind of see Hegel pretty much came and told Rene Descartes, you have to even doubt this thing that you think you can't doubt, because there's an interconnectivity at work. And this is incredible because most people right now, especially on this planet, are living selfish lives. Okay, and I very playfully say they're selling fish. They're so selfish. It's as if they're just doing one act and their mind's not growing. They might be accumulating a lot by just that one action, but it's as if they don't truly experience their intelligence before the final curtain is pulled, because we're all performers and we're such miraculous performers that it's like the elements of nature and the laws of the universe have allowed a condition like this to exist. So it's kind of a reverse engineering recognition of the supernatural and divinity. When I say reverse engineer, that means you will realize the ultimate is never conceptual. all language and concepts are effects of the truth. Every word I'm saying, unfortunately, that's just how the universe is. The moment I say the word and the moment it enters your ear, by the time it enters your ear, my mind has already moved somewhere else. Okay, that's how much our minds are changing all the time, especially in our subconscious. So eventually, this sort of mind-body dualism was questioned, and the further model of exploration began, right? And many people who have tried to find a sort of model, a way of kind of seeing this ultimate truth. Like everybody's trying to figure out why we're all on a rock in the middle of nowhere, okay? And evolution is a great step towards that. You know, the idea that, you know, I don't know who not Richard, Charles Darwin was. I don't know who the dude was, but like the idea he brought was very fascinating because it was a confirmation of our objective agreement that it's like think of it this way. Before Darwin called it evolution, some people called it growth. But when Darwin said evolution, it's as if he had a magnifying glass on how the whole world was growing and noticed a certain unique part of it. Okay? Anyways, the reason I'm again kind of speaking about this mind-body dualism and just the deeper dimensions of the human being is one, because I think we are temporary beings. Why not just wonder what it's all about, like in a healthy way? Okay, and secondly, I want to say, because there comes levels of responsibility. So think of it this way: a child is born in society. And this child comes into this society and says, what am I here to do, people? People, give me the data, give me the news, give me the newest facts, you know, give me the newest results. Tell me, what am I here to do? Okay? And so that child is waiting for instruction. It is still dependent on the world taking the first step. Okay? However, before the child can truly contribute to the world, they must first cultivate the ability to contribute to themselves. And they must begin contributing to themselves in two values, okay? In two ways. One way is, I want you to experience your desires and your ego and your selfishness, okay? Because you cannot control anything you fear. Okay, you won't even grow as a person if you don't challenge your fear. Have this approach. When fear comes, you just look at fear and be like, why are you here, you know? And then your mind will kind of like discover courage, you know. But anyways, I want to point to an individual responsibility. You gotta first, just like how you wear clothing, you know, and you go into society as a person, similarly, how you clothe your mind in various ways that the world is allowed for you to happen is also important. And that's where I want people to kind of realize you have to be your own doctor. You know, you have to be your own cure. You have to be your own salvation because you are you. It's like you have come here to be you. Okay? And so many people are not experiencing and accessing their own intelligence. They're just constantly being pushed by the programs of social activity. And you know why? Because we fear loneliness. Because we fear loneliness, we sacrifice intelligence for community. And we have no choice. Because community is where all intelligence is kind of gravitated towards. That means the moment we were no longer just a solo bewildered beasts moving on this earth, we in some sense became tribal creatures. In our tribal kind of existence, we had hierarchies develop. These hierarchies are like what most people are like, okay, if everybody had money, there would be no difference in classes. Let me tell you, there would be, because it's an evolutionary thing. It's an evolutionary thing that suddenly this creature found itself in an environment where it was challenged in a unique way. And if it did not respond to the data of the challenge, it would fade. it would get defined by the world. But if it did respond to it, it would in some sense be the one who, it's as if like, it's hilarious because everything we see in this universe in regards to stardust and space continues, gives us an advantage that so many other species on the surface of this planet don't have. You see, it is your fear is just life's way of saying, look at there, let's just go through it, confront it, go see what happens, you know. There are unexplainable mysteries on this planet, and the first unexplainable mystery you have access to is yourself. Okay, study yourself. Zen Master Dogen, this like, some people consider him to be an incredibly like aware person, and you know, Zen Master Dogen was asked what is truth. Sincerely, a student asked him, and he looked at the guy and he's like, "You want to know how Buddha walked? You want to know Buddha's path, Buddha's way?" He said, "First, you must study the self." And there was a pause, as if like the mind of who Zen Master Dogen was talking to. Zen Master Dogen was such an intense presence, you know, that he said, in some sense, you must study the self. But to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to awaken to the nature of all things. Just listen to the last sentence. To awaken to the nature of all things, to how all things move. You awaken as a natural being in a natural world before, your eyes were so stuck on the screen that they eventually went in it. It's so important, our relationship with our world, because it is the effect of our mind, no? That means however way you behave throughout the day, it's an effect of your mind. There is some inner kind of atmosphere of conscious free will behind your eyes that is, in some sense, choosing. Do you see? You're choosing. You're choosing how you shape reality. And so a lot of it is involuntary because that's our biological system. So the mind does not just listen to, don't think your mind is just listening to your thoughts. Your mind is, your body is a incredible pattern, is creating an incredible pattern that's echoing in a sort of, in the depth of your conscious space. Okay? So you see, find contentment with the world. And now I'm going to say a few things that's going to kind of share all these dimensions of this talk. By the way, guys, if anybody's listening, if you feel you want me to focus on one idea that you're curious about, because these are live streams, the point is that like that's possible. So feel free to just write it in the chat. I can talk more about whatever you feel you are drawn to in some sense. But anyways, the pieces of peace suddenly become how many individual creatures now have to have the responsibility of peacefully living. with one another. But it's no longer just peacefulness we need. We need to also feed the hunger, or let's say we need to satisfy the thirst of the excitement of our mind. Because after your physical survival is maintained, you will look for something exciting to do. You will get bored of a successful pattern or a chaotic pattern. It doesn't matter what it is. Life is so phenomenal because let me tell you what happens. I've wondered about the psychology of these ancient yogis that would go into caves, and I thought, what is the value of completely isolating yourself from your world? And then I finally realized it's to notice the movement of your inner world. Okay, so pretty much it's as if the yogis are a testament, you know, rishis in particular. They're how would I say it? They're a testament to how man can exist not just as a body that's howling a brain mind around, but the being can exist as a mind, and the body can be still, and yet many other movements will still be perceived in the sphere of consciousness, or in the sphere of pure awareness, because what we call consciousness is like form plus awareness. Okay, but then there are states where it's pure awareness, and these states of pure awareness, again, it's like the Satchidananda state. It's kind of like how you're recognizing conscious existence is bliss. You're accepting how consciousness and existence are here at once. Consciousness and matter, Purusha and Prakriti, are here together. Okay, so you recognize, okay, I'm this biological, a physical kind of being, and this body is temporarily here. I have to maintain it, or obviously it will not be maintained. And so you have this sort of mentality with your physical biological existence, but then you wonder who is driving this biological vehicle, let's say, who is navigating your attention throughout the day, and you realize it is as far as you have known yourself. That's pretty much it. So the various ways that one finds separation, so it's kind of like this. I'm kind of trying to spark an inner revolution for the first time, an internal revolution, a request from all members of a species to wonder about who they truly are. Okay? I know many people, philosophy is not as cool as science, but philosophy is kind of man's effort to study behind his eyes. That means think of philosophers as the scientists of the movement of the mind. Okay, because eventually we have all wondered about the relationship of meaning with phenomena. You know, this has been kind of the destiny of many ontologists. So a piece that is in pieces, we either keep, the mirror broken, or we find a new mirror. Or if we find, how can I tell you? It's like, if you're choosing to be separate from like all, like, let's say, the stars and the galaxies in out in space, if you want to have this notion that you're separate from that, okay, you want to avoid the fact that all existence happens at once. That's a unique magic trick. An inner transformation allows a new outer relationship to happen. As people begin caring for living phenomena, the species will find a new momentum. You know, it's as if we are like, you know how like many parents look at their kids and they see the decisions their kids make, and some of the decisions are like foolish. They look at the kid and they're like, oh man, kid, you're smarter than this, but you're not applying it, you know. And I feel like we should create a sort of culture, a sort of global culture where, as in many levels of honor and approach, we create a sort of new human identity. You know, we imagine we call it the responsible human. You know, and what does that mean? That means responsibility. Kind of always sounded to me like an ability to respond. Okay, so it's the free will. This inner free will who dwelled in its desires and selfish ways and solo ways of living. Suddenly, it's like, okay, this 4 billion-year-old science project called humanity is here. What can we do about it? You know, when I realize wars start in the minds of men, I realize where peace can be found. There was a story of the Tower of Babylon, the Tower of Babel. And this is a very unique story. It's this notion that in this kind of universe, human beings were united. It was one humanity, and all human beings on the planet spoke one language. And as they all spoke one language, they were so organized that they began creating a tower that would reach the clouds where they believed the gods were. So human beings, for the first time, they were building a bridge to paradise, and as a giant tower, okay, that all human beings could climb and go through and get to heaven, okay. And so, the moment this happens, and the gods see this, and as the story goes, the gods see this up there. The gods who are like standing above the clouds see this, and they're like, "Holy shit, these guys are climbing up!" And instead of breaking the building, okay, what they do exactly is that they make human beings speak different languages. The moment human beings speak different languages, they can no longer collectively communicate at the same efficiency. So, do you see? I find that we should take man's mistake as an inability to acknowledge ability. That's the sin. That's the only sin that's occurred. So this sense of notion of like how, like, let's say post, like after the gods make you these, all the people in the world speak different languages and they can no longer get along and work together. I'm just trying to say we're kind of in the same situation, okay? Where we're in these different cultures, different behaviors, you know, our news is filled with various ways that we are separating our humanity. Like, news is not helping the human being evolve, by the way. You know, when the entertainment industry understands it's much more valuable to lead the planet towards efficient decisions rather than inefficient decisions, then comes a very unique approach. For the first time, we will care for our future, and then we will be inspired, you know? If you don't care for the world, you don't really organize anything, you know? Because there's two ways to go with the flow. One way, you're going with the flow where you're a dead fish, you know, and the other way you're going with the flow where you're actually not a dead fish, you're like a it's like you're consciously moving with the rhythms of your world. So what happens is that all people around the world suddenly begin realizing the value and the opportunity that there's a world here. Now, as they go running into society, they will begin to understand many inefficiencies, many discrepancies, a lot of tension and friction because people have different minds. Okay? And this can be seen at first as alarming, you know? For me, this was so alarming in my childhood that I was just shy and, in some sense, very silent a lot of my childhood, you know? With my family, I was very loud and I would speak a lot, but when I was in society, I was a quiet kid, you know? Because I felt it's not that I didn't have anything to say, I didn't know what I could say, okay? And it was a very strange kind of situation. And once the value of self is understood, all those people who right now they feel they've reached some high elevated level of awareness or whatever, okay? All of it comes down to eventually how all this ability is going to respond to the moment, right? And it starts with levels. First, you fix the microcosm of your universe. You handle your microcosmic activities. That means you take care of your body and you take care of the way it's going to continue. Okay? And you do this in accordance to your nature. And your nature is not a character in a story because a lot of people feel like, oh man, that guy's evil. And when we look at what evil is evil is a sort of characteristic of animalness, animalistic behavior. So it's like, as we see in our scientific evolution, an animal became civilized. You know, an animal suddenly stood on its two legs, made clothing and made trains and got on the subway every day. Do you see, like, this animal is behaving so differently than all the other animals on this planet that if all the other animals could see us and they had personalities, they'd be like, these human beings are aliens, you know? You know, and so I don't believe we are, but we are odd in regards to other creatures on this planet. So this sense of being odd makes us wonder. This wonder makes us entertain a notion of infinite continuity. When we entertain the notion of infinite continuity, the best we can do, honestly, is just make the world a better place for the future generations to live, and put the option of our suggestions on the side, you know. That means there's two ways, you know, like one way the child will enter this world and it will decide its brutality is its strength, and there's ways the child will enter this world and realize it's not brutality that's the strength, it's kind of awareness of what's here, awareness of the data. You know, a lot of people, they like, imagine throughout the day waves of data are hitting you, okay? These waves of data that are hitting you, okay, how you organize it will suggest your shape, like your inner personality in some sense. Okay, so pretty much personality gets created in the dynamism of a response of an individual objective phenomena, which is also subjectively individualized itself. Kind of, that's where evolution begins. Evolution is like, after we became an individual, what does this individual do? Okay, start working. Okay, you see, you know, it's very profound. It's as if like this, in my science fiction, I write science fiction. I mean, in past few years, I've started to, and there's this notion of this kind of like universal kind of God-like presence that is aiming to repopulate the planet, and this being is so like enlightened and advanced, like this extraterrestrial being in the sci-fi setting that I've. This is in one of my novels. It's what happens is that, how would I say it? This extraterrestrial comes on the, I remember, the extraterrestrial comes on the surface of a planet, looks at the soil of the planet, and just shouts, commands it to awaken. Okay, you see? And it was this notion I had that kind of the same way we feel the Big Bang Theory, the universe ignited from nothing into something. Okay, we feel like that's pretty much our mainstream view. From nothing suddenly came something. Bang, there was something. Religious ideology tells you it was again the word of God. Okay, there's many different ways one can see this, but okay, there we go. Look, I was looking for the song. I tend to give these talks when I have headphones on, and there's many ways the world can be interpreted. There's many ways the world can be put into words, pretty much. Okay, I find that the ultimate moral decision will be whether one would want a reality that is functioning with efficient functioning with efficient vision, or if it is functioning with inefficient vision. Okay, I find that a civilization can make either two decisions, either efficient ones or inefficient. Now, the efficiency is a very hard decision because sometimes people don't know if what they're doing is right for now or it's right for the future. Do you know? The reason I write science fiction is because sometimes I can share ideas there that I feel they're not relevant to now. Is a statement I have to say is thought matter and or is matter thought? And these questions will eventually produce enough excitement, and it will sometimes you will wake up and you will feel the day is new because what you see in it you haven't seen before. The day can happen in various ways. Chaos and randomity are not negative forces per se. They're just ways the world moves. And it's very phenomenal because our minds have more freedom than our bodies. It's kind of very fascinating when you look at ancient Vedic culture and you look at certain ways these yogis behaved and certain abilities they had. You would get really fascinated because their abilities would suggest a different world they were seeing. So, as if your ability depends on the world you see. So if your ability is crucial to the peace, if your existence is a piece of this ultimate peace. And there's many pieces, there's many different people in this existence, in this society. You find peace, and then as a piece you share, you in some sense contribute to the collective peace. Peace, believe it or not, is an allowance. It's an authorization. It's an agreement. It's a mutual respect. Many politicians say this is kind of politician wisdom, where they say you don't have to have mutual trust first, but you need to have mutual respect in all situations, especially in negotiations of the mind. You know, there's I see, like, for example, the TV show Suits is trying to mimic what occurs in law firms. Okay, and when I see some of those kind of conversations, and I say, okay, let's entertain the thought that these law firms are kind of similar to this in some way. Okay, and then I wondered, those people in that boardroom talking, shouting, negotiating, and constantly challenging one another, they don't recognize the incredible intensity of their intelligence in that moment when they are functioning through a rhythm of clarity. Clarity comes in rhythms. It's kind of something where you start treating every moment as a puzzle where you can solve, and once you confront a certain amount of your fears, once you open the door of your fears, and you're like, okay, let's see what it is. Okay, let's see what happens. Then your mind expands. It expands because the fear was limiting you from acknowledging a certain amount of data that's in this world. Okay, and it's not all about following and being a follower of truth. You can be. Of course, we say that freedom is one of those values that's kind of like the paper we're writing on. Freedom is an incredible value, and it's a pillar of civilization that must be kept. Love is another pillar of civilization that must be kept. Believe it or not, chaos is another pillar of civilization that must be kept. Some people think evil must completely go. I will tell you, there never was a good and evil person on this planet. There was a mind that saw good things and bad things. Do you see what I'm saying? Our morality is in accordance to our intelligence. Our intelligence is in accordance to our environment. Our environment is in accordance with our inner environment, with how our intelligence is present. That means don't just, like, you. Every person by now probably has mastered sitting on a chair. It's like everybody can sit on the chair. Maybe Peter Griffin from Family Guy might forget how to sit on a chair, but everybody knows how to sit on a chair. The activity has become so repeated and simple, and you've experienced it so many times that you don't doubt you know how to sit on a chair. Okay? So when you wonder, why isn't the ability of your mind, of your intelligence, why isn't that accessible? And I'll tell you, it has to do with how you hold it. Okay? Kind of like how you position the projector, you know, on what screen. So pretty much you're seeing phenomena, you're seeing a world here, and how your mind treats this world and its values. It can either work with just your sophisticated thoughts on what you should be, or it can occur as a momentary you experiencing your intelligence at your own pace. Trust me, my mind was closed until I found the pace, the speed that my attention can move in. Sometimes your attention is moving all over the place, but sometimes your attention is something that you can, how can I say it? You can align it to any form. Okay, the whole point of meditation, true meditation, was single pointedness of attention, And then eventually you would understand the oneness of mind. And the oneness of mind is how the space of awareness is holding the phenomena. So just like how empty space is holding, the planets in some sense, we at the same time see that there's a sort of emptiness holding the beliefs of all the ways that we think the world is. You pretty much find that the thin ice breaks and you discover the sky that you're falling through. You discover your value in existence because your value is now. When there is now is the only time you can perform. Every person, there was an ancient Vedic concept of lila. Lila was a notion. It's not just Vedic. Many cultures have had this approach where they would say it is the play. It is like society is, everybody is an actor, okay? Everybody is an actor. But most people are acting in ways where they think the way they're acting is them, so they don't believe they're acting. But they are acting. Every person's intelligence is functioning, okay? You have to honor your intelligence or you wouldn't care for it. Sometimes it's not that people are not creative, it's that they don't care about their ideas. So they don't, even if a good idea comes to them, they'll just watch it and watch it come and go. They wouldn't think of themselves that they can innovate. And honestly, it's very simple because you got to think of it this way. Do you know how many ways there are? Like, do you know that there's a sort of, how would I say it? There's frontiers to explore every day, okay? Every day, I remember when I was like, this was actually in 2012, 12 or 13. I remember I wrote a sentence, which was, it was like the first time I felt I was actually like a writer, okay? And before I give these talks, I consider myself that I dabbled in writing first before speaking, you know? So I understood how the pen moved before my mind did, you know. And I don't want to live in a world that looks the same the next day. This, yeah, I don't want to live in a world that looks the same the next day. That was the first sentence I wrote where I kind of considered myself being able to truly at least share. Like, it was the first time I felt my authenticity moved the pen. Okay, and life is something where, think of it this way, I always like to entertain the idea of that one can attain mastery of the elemental forces. I mean, I'm kind of a nerd, I guess, because when I was younger, the concept of a mage was fascinating to me. The fact that somebody could control the forces of nature was, I was like, whoa. And back in the day, they saw, like, there wasn't the periodic table, so they pretty much saw earth, air, water, fire, and some cultures considered ether the fifth element, which is space, as if space itself is an element that's holding all the other elements. Okay, so anyways, Where was I going with this? I'm just trying to kind of share that you got to value novelty. And so the whole idea of, I'm kind of, the whole picture I'm trying to paint here is that the human being has to care about his inner environment and his outer environment. He preserves his inner environment by knowing himself, by wondering, and by not getting rid of the unknown and the X factor, the unknown X factor of life. Okay, that's where wonder lives, and you don't disturb it. Okay, but you advance. And the other angle would be, in some sense, after people have, in some sense, cared to know themselves, they will trust themselves, and as the person trusts themselves, their ability increases. This brings about a sort of individual mastery. Once you have fully experienced your individualness, then in your contentment and serenity, you will find your feet ready to already move to the next step. And the next step is not somewhere, it's not anywhere else. Trust me, all spiritual practice is a round circle. They understood this in Zen, so they drew even a symbol for it. And so it was one of those things where you're looking for something beyond. As you do, you're pretty much discovering the workings of your mind. Whatever data comes to you is like a revelation of how your mind's working. Okay? So you establish your free will separate from the finding, in some sense. Even though the finding could be that your free will is one with everything. So this individual, after taking responsibility for the subjective reality of oneself, begins to take responsibility for the objective reality, and then begins caring for the world. After you've played the games of taking care of yourself, you will move on to the games of taking care of more. Okay, that's kind of like, it's our ability. Okay, we hunted and we gathered, in some sense, back in the day, as tribes. Now in some sense we go find, we make new inventions, and we bring it and share it to society, and we evolve it. Okay, where we bring in new ideas, pretty much. So it's our decisions are reflections of inner movement of intelligence. Inner, or even more safer to say unknown. So, on some level, when I think about world peace, I say, okay, when you look at the human body, aside from free will and consciousness and the brain and the sensory ability to move your hands and legs and all this, okay, a lot of the processes of the body are involuntarily happening. Your heart is just beating on its own, your lungs is, you're breathing automatically. And you begin to see these are areas of your intelligence that, regardless if you think or not, are occurring endlessly. That means your heart, you could tell it to stop, but it doesn't. Okay? And in some sense, you recognize the fool's errand of simulating an unnecessary and efficient view. And so eventually you come to this recognition, like, this is how I see it, that a lot of part of nature, it's like how they say 70% of the being is like water or something. Not like water, like tap water, you know what I mean? Like, the self is liberated, and the same freedom is in the space of the collective view. The ability of the individual can, through their intelligence, be a contribution to their species. You find the honor of your species. Same way samurai had honor, you have honor for this thing called humanity. And eventually you will see that when the attention of many human beings goes on what's better, okay, regardless of the mistakes of the past, reality changes. You have to find efficient ideas to pursue, ideas where your whole intelligence is activated. Individual responsibility evolves to universal responsibility. When it evolves to that point, you begin acknowledging people's intelligence not as their physical body, not as their color, not as their atomic makeup and composure. Like you stop thinking people are people. You see every other person is actually the world, but they're moving parts of the world. Okay? There are creatures on this world. And so are we. We are among those creatures. We are those creatures. However, awareness can now contain itself in a way where it's kind of been lost in the mystery of what is this imagination, what is this mind and consciousness, and now it's kind of like come round circle and has had enough. And so you begin getting excited of real potentials of your civilization. That means if there was a button right now, and this button, you pressed it, it would say world peace. Okay, would you press it? Would bring complete world peace. Would you press that button? And that's a very unique question. Because what is world peace then, we wonder? You try to find peace. You realize you must create it. You first create this peace for yourself. It reaches the brim of the cup. The cup gets filled completely. And then you begin becoming interested in greater ways your experience can move. And this doesn't mean just chemically. I'm not trying to say like I have unique thoughts and on psychedelics or whatever, and chemically altering the state of the mind, or even notions that the state of the mind is pretty much like it's a chemical change all the time. Various parts of the brain activating is a chemical change. And so it's kind of very unique because how can you shape a moving creature? We have bodies, but we change. It's like our body is not the same as it was 10 years ago. So we change. So it's like we're this changing body, okay? And this changing body is like a uh, echo of how the world is actually changing. So for me, I find that people should not fear age, should not fear getting older and all this stuff, because it's pretty much you're growing with your world. It's as if like you've kind of imagine you paid for a ticket for a roller coaster ride, and you were right there about to go on the roller coaster, and then you were like, no. It's as if this life is something that's given. It's the condition for your conscious existence to occur. Now you study it, you apply your intelligence, you move through it. You begin eventually realizing greater levels of your intelligence will not open up to you unless you have a devotion for a universal responsibility. That means you care for the universal result, and that means you're caring for dimensions of gentleness, and you're caring for dimensions of, in some sense, peace and whatnot. Sorry guys, it's like my computer's gonna die. It's at a 7% battery, so I have to end this. But thanks for tuning in. Sometimes it's the effort of exploration that outweighs the finding because it reveals a greater intelligence at work. Sometimes we're looking for truth, but it's all here. You have to realize mastery comes from acceptance of the truth, of the greater states of your potential being. Because it's energy being free will somehow, okay? Atomic energy is being free will. Anyway, you guys, take care. Thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and else.